Sweet. So yeah, welcome back to the Athlete Edge podcast. Today's topic going to be sort of chatting around hardware versus software and why it sort of matters, especially in team sports. So I guess can you start off by breaking down exactly what you mean when we say hardware versus software?
So I think an easy way to think of it would be the hardware is the physical parts of the body you can see. So that would be muscles, bones, joints, tendons. So essentially it's what we're training a lot in the gym. The software is a bit more about the processing system. So we think of that as our brain and our nervous system, which is sending the signals and trying to coordinate it all to make us move and do what we need to do.
Yeah, so with obviously social media and it's sort of off season in America now, and you got a lot of their top athletes are quite influential in, I guess, the social media space. And so we see, like, for example, Saquon Barkley, running back from Philadelphia Eagles, coming off a Super Bowl.
Yep.
And there's videos of him squatting 300 kilos in the gym.
Yep.
And everyone's celebrating that. So what are the kind of effects that has on people who are sort of viewing that?
I think it's great in one sense that it reinforces the importance of the gym when you see elite athletes, at the top of their game in the gym, investing a lot of time. We've just got to be careful in and around, does chasing more numbers on the squat really help? And also then the question is, how do you get a squat so big? So the conversation we're having is, he does a lot of speed training as well, which isn't as sexy, and they're not showing that as much. Everyone wants to see this massive, PB in his squat. Is his squat where it's at? Because he does a lot of really high quality sprint work, resisted sprinting, top speed work. As a running back, he's obviously got to be really fast. Does that help his squat, or is the squat more helping his speed? And that's what we're going to get into around the balance between the two and how they interact with each other. So I just think we've got to be conscious of, we want to build really good hardware, so we want strong muscles and joints and tendons, absolutely. But we've also got to make sure that we're not putting all our eggs in that basket and just trying to get really strong. We need to be able to actually still move fast.
So obviously with team sports, there's a lot of sort of change of direction. You need to be fit, you need to be fast, you need to be strong. There's all these sort of different things that you need to sort of tick off. And so for our team athletes, what happens when they focus too much on, say, the hardware compared to the software, and what happens when they neglect the other side?
Yep. So I think to the point around following social media and like the Saquon Barkley example, I think what happens a lot is all these fields exist in a silo, and we get information from different silos and then often take it as kind of gospel. So we'll see sprinters and doing lots of speed training and think, we only need to do sprint training. We'll see powerlifters get really strong and then only think, we just need to squat and deadlift and bench press. Because that's true in their environment. So the problem, as you're saying, with team sports is we need to do a lot of different things really well. So for me, the approach is in the gym, we use that for specific reasons. And then when we hit the speed sessions, we've got specific things we're trying to develop there. So for example, in the gym, we're working on our strength, and when I say strength, well-rounded strength. So we're not just doing the same movement patterns or working the same sort of muscles for 8 sets. We want, a wide variety of movements so we get well-rounded strength. So we're not, for example, just getting really strong in our quads because we squat and lunge and do all that sort of stuff. We want to make sure we're doing so posterior chain, so hemis and calves are strong too, and obviously upper body core, all that sort of stuff. So that's our hardware. So that moves really well. We want some, tendon-specific stuff in the gym because a lot of our sport really beats up our tendons. So we know anything sort of past 10 minutes stops becoming beneficial for tendon strength and starts to become detrimental. So what we do in the gym is we want to offset a lot of that by having, really strong, resilient tendons. And then there's an element of some, coordination and skill type stuff in the gym, absolutely. But that's essentially where it's like a bridge into then our speed sessions where we want to make sure that we do our coordination and rhythm and skill stuff to a really high level.
And we sort of know from like my conversations with parents, and they might have their young athletes who sort of go to the gym by themselves or with a few mates, and the issue with that, and we've talked about it in the past, around how athletes tend to kind of, I guess, defer to what they prefer in a way. So like what they kind of do, what they like. So it's a lot of upper body, bicep curls, bench for boys. So what kind of effect does that have on them from a sort of software and hardware kind of perspective?
Well, I think from like talking about hardware, it's pretty obvious that it's going to just overdevelop the same areas they keep training. The problem with that is the feedback loop that then creates is, they're seeing results in that area, so they want to do more of it. They're getting better at it, they're getting stronger, they potentially start beating their mates in their bench press. So what do? They want to bench press more to keep that going up. But does it really help them? Obviously getting stronger helps to a point, but at some point the time they're spending doing that, would it be a lot better spent doing something else? Probably. We see injury risk because now they're just getting overdeveloped in some areas and underdeveloped in others. The big mistake there is now they think they're ticking off their gym. So, my son does 3 gym sessions a week, doesn't need to do any more. It's like, well, I'd count that as 0 sessions, and maybe it's a negative effect because they're doing the wrong thing. So they actually need to stop doing that. They'd be better off not doing it in some cases because of the imbalances they create. They then start to get tight, and injury risk comes off the back of they just become poor movers because of the imbalances and the restrictions they create off the back of focusing on too much of the same thing.
And so if we sort of dive in a bit more around, I guess, the software side of things, most people are kind of familiar with the hardware because that's kind of a bit more, a bit more superficial. You can actually see it. Whereas, the software is like things like, your central nervous system. So what kind of role does that play in movement quality?
It is massive. So things like intra and intermuscular coordination, rate coding. These are the things that we learn at uni, but people would have no clue about.
Never heard
but
of it.
Essentially, it's about how much signal the brain sends down to the area it needs to send it to get movement to happen. So intramuscular coordination, for example, is the brain saying, I need your quad to fire so that you can extend your leg out and kick the ball. How much of that quad and which part of the quad do I need to activate? And this is happening in a split second. So obviously that's a skill that it's got to coordinate and learn because it's a feedback loop. It's sending then information back to the brain. Brain's going, what's going on? Send recruitment stuff back. Intermuscular coordination gets even more complicated because now it's about how it times all the different muscles. So for me to extend my leg out, it needs my hamstring to relax. So it's got to pull down the signal to my hamstring. But then as my leg swings out, now it's saying, we're getting risky here. The leg's starting to swing out. I need then to stop my quad activating and actually put on my hamstring to slow that from happening. So this is happening at split seconds, and we're talking, hundreds of thousands of millions of signals going forward and back. So you think of software having to train it. Well, for something so simple, even simple tasks like walking, there is that many reflexes going off that the body and the brain needs to learn. Things like rate coding is then like, how fast I need to send the signals and how quickly do I need to ramp it up. So this is all trained by putting our bodies in the positions and going through the movements and the skills that it's going to face. So when we talk about being consistent and the work required, well, if we talk about AFL, there's a lot of different movements you got to be an expert at to do it at a high level. So how do you train that? Well, you can't fit them all into every week. So we've got to plan and we've got to progress and we've got to layer them in from, 12 or 10 all the way through to 18 and beyond. And it takes a lot of work. That's why it's really hard to be a good mover and do things at a high level.
And I think even with some of our younger athletes, we see around just in terms of the learning how to train, so the intent-based stuff. So obviously with the central nervous system, a lot of it's like speed and intent to sort of, I guess, fire it up. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely.
But with often kids who are sort of developing and learning how to train in the gym for the first time, we kind of got to cue them as like, all right, let's max effort here. Let's go. Come on, like a bit more intent. So how does, is there much of a difference between moving things heavy but slowly and then moving things with speed and intent, and kind of what's the balance?
Yep. I think it's, so if you do things, there's 2 key ways to really drive up the central nervous system recruitment, and that's basically, think of intensity. So that can be really, if it's slow, then it's got to be heavy because the speed's not going to overload it, so the load needs to be high. Obviously, there's a risk with that because that puts pressure on things like muscles and how you can control that, and potentially if you get it wrong, the weight folds in half and you get really hurt. The other side of it is, well, speed, because now it's the signal's got, and we need things really quickly. So again, the bigger motor units, the type 2 fibres, probably heard type 1, type 2, the more fast twitch muscle fibres get recruited as a priority because we need to move fast. So if we only ever train really slow, yes, we can still recruit some of the type 2 fibres, but from a central nervous system speed, trying to recruit things quickly, we're not training that side of it. So we're very hardware focused, and we're not getting as much of the, fast signal. So we've all experienced our phones or, TV or a device where the internet connection's been slow, crappy, and how frustrating it is. Essentially, that's what you're training your body to be, having slow internet speed. It's working, but it's sort of spinning the wheel. It might still work well. It's like a big file, but it's not going to do it quickly. Versus when things are, really sharp, internet speeds really fast, and bang, you just click a button and it's done. Essentially, that's why we need to have a blend of the two.
And when we sort of talk about our strength training and how that sort of fits into mobility, flexibility, and injury prevention, I know that I test a lot of the kids, and we go through our sort of 4 or 5 mobility tests, and obviously most males, as we've discovered, between that sort of 13, 15, really tight hammies, just as that's their sort of heavy growth period.
Yep.
So how does actually strength training, because I feel like most people out there probably just like, I just need to stretch more to improve my mobility, but what's role does strength training?
My take is stretching is only really short term, because the way stretching helps improve flexibility is it just reduces the pain tolerance of that stretch, which the long term effects of that is non-existent. Like 2 days later, your tightness is back because the pain tolerance is back. Like it hurts to stretch it that far, so the body stops using it. What strength training actually does, and this is why it's the most effective way to improve your flexibility and mobility long term, is it actually changes the physical length of your muscle. So it actually gives you a longer and stronger muscle. So more muscle fibers in length means you get a longer muscle. So we can actually improve the length of your hamstrings by doing things like hamstring loaded exercises where they get stretched. So it's a great way to improve your mobility long term. The key there is still doing things well. So if you only do things that you're good at in the ranges that you're strong, then no, it won't help, because you're not working through new range to not only give you better hardware, but to teach the brain you can squat that low or you can lunge into that position and it's not dangerous, so therefore you use it more. Ground ball in footy is a classic. So a lot of our kids can't split squat their knee to the floor, but then expect to pick up a ground ball at full speed in a chaos situation and be successful. Well, if you can't put your knee on the ground, I don't think you're going to have a good ground ball technique. So it actually starts to have a big implication on their footy. That's just the mobility side. Then are they strong enough through their quads and their glutes and their core to actually, adductors, even the ankle joint, can it get down in that position, load and drive out? The gym also, we know it's important because stronger athletes are harder to break, and that's just simple in terms of muscles are stronger, tendons are stronger, they take more force to tear them. So it has a big implication there. And that's not just, pushing sort of load, but absorbing force. So landing, like decelerating is insanely high forces on the body. So we want to be able to, hit and break really quickly. We need strong muscles and strong tendons and strong joints so that hopefully we don't hurt ourselves. And then we want that strength to be well balanced. So can we, control limbs in all different positions, all different planes. So example around do what you like doing. If guys do lower body lifts, they're a teenager in the gym, even then sometimes it's a bit hairy, but like they're doing a lot of squatting and this sort of stuff. How many times would you have seen a lateral squat or, like a curtsy or reverse lunge with a bit of, multi-planar direction or some sort of rotation with like a plate? You never see it. So we're just sort of working the same plane, the same muscles, and then wonder why it doesn't help us get better.
And I think that sort of range of motion that you're sort of referencing earlier there, even just around some of our own athletes who kind of struggle with it if they didn't have that exposure when they were younger, because obviously when they first come to us when they're sort of 10 to 13, but it's a lot of the technique, range of movement, control, those kind of things, whereas I guess kids who are kind of unfamiliar at that start when they're older, they don't have that kind of foundation.
Yeah.
As we've kind of sort of seen.
Yeah, it's the irony of that is the older someone is, the later we get someone, the longer it takes to make changes from a movement quality standpoint, particularly if they're like really tired and haven't done much, like they're pretty poor movers, then it's a lot of work. The irony with it is they've got less time. So if you're in a talent pathway or they got a certain goal, it's not like we get 10 years with those guys because they're 27. So yeah, it's a balance, and that's why we like it. So we've done our 10 to 13 program, because if we can get them that early and start doing drills and basic movements, we can start to fix all those issues then. By the time they're 15, 16, and we've got a few examples of that you wouldn't think they're 16 in terms of just how competent they are in the gym, how well they move, how strong they are. Their speed numbers are on par with our 18, 19-year-old guys, just because they've been doing it for the same amount of time or sometimes longer.
And so how would you kind of structure a week where we do touch on the sort of software and hardware around the sort of strength and speed, and how do you actually structure a training week so that you can maximise both?
Yep.
I know that, we've talked in the past around if your sort of priorities around sprinting, you probably don't want to do sprinting straight after a pretty heavy session.
Yep.
So how would you kind of structure?
I think for most, my rule would be prioritise speed and prioritise that when you can be fresh. So if you train Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday, Friday mornings are not speed, just because you're just carrying over too much fatigue and you just won't do it well. So ideally you do it the morning of your training. People are like, oh, well, I've got training that night. Isn't that an issue? Well, we talk about high and low days. So you just bank as much work as you can on the high day. And if you're being smart, you shouldn't be carrying too much fatigue. So obviously the devil's in the details a bit. But if you're training smart, especially in season, you do that in the morning, and then you have your team training that night. And that way then you're probably looking at your gym on the other days. And then that's just a balance around that. So that's probably just a really general framework. Where you maybe get individual a bit more, like if you're a really tall, skinny kid and your speed's pretty solid, well, then I'm sort of the same mindset, but I'm prioritising strength and sort of some muscle building. So then I'm making those days when I'm fresh, because I want my central nervous system to function really well, I'm making sure that I do them on the mornings or afternoons where I've had nothing in that kind of preceding morning or afternoon. Does that make sense? So it's just about how you then balance that out across the week. I recommend most should be doing probably in season 1 speed session, maybe 2 if speed needs to be a real priority, but you're probably doing between 2 and 3 gym sessions.